First contact with an alien species was supposed to be a dignified affair. At least that's what Captain Jack Reynolds had been told during the 17 mandatory diplomatic seminars he'd been forced to attend. 17 seminars that, as it turned out, failed to cover what to do when your Chief Security Officer punches an alien diplomat for calling hockey ritualized territorial aggression with primitive implements. Officer Kowalski. Reynolds hissed through clenched teeth as the 7-foot reptilian ambassador's scales flushed a vivid purple. What part of represent humanity with dignity involved a right hook? Kowalski, a barrel-chested woman with shortly cropped red hair and the build of someone who bench-pressed cargo containers for fun, shrugged. He insulted the Stanley Cup, sir. Reynolds closed his eyes and counted to 10, a technique his therapist had recommended for stress management. It wasn't working. When he opened them again, the entire Vexari delegation was still staring at them, their vertical pupils narrowed to thin slits. Ambassador Krex, the lead diplomat of the reptilian species, straightened his ornate ceremonial collar. "This confirms our preliminary observations," he said, his voice a dry rasp that somehow conveyed both disdain and fascination. Humans engage in violence without biological necessity. It wasn't violence, Kowalski protested. It was a love tap. Lieutenant Commander Prisha Nayak, the ship's exobiologist, stepped forward with a placating gesture. "Perhaps we could explain our concept of sports," she suggested. "It's a cultural misunderstanding." Reynolds silently thanked whatever cosmic force had placed Nayak on his crew. She had a gift for smoothing over the diplomatic disasters that seemed to follow humans like particularly persistent cosmic radiation. Krex tilted his wedge-shaped head. "Explain." "Well," Nayak began, "humans engage in competitive physical activities as recreation. It builds community, tests our limits, and shows who's toughest without actually killing each other." Kowalski interrupted. "It's efficient." The translator must have done something strange with that last word, because the entire Vexari delegation simultaneously took a step backward. Their scale colors shifted through a spectrum of what Reynolds was pretty sure represented alarm, confusion, and possibly digestive distress. "You fight when not hungry?" asked a smaller Vexari with bright green markings around its eyes. "All the time," Kowalski said cheerfully. "Boxing, wrestling, martial arts." "To establish dominance?" Krex interrupted. "Nah, for fun." The word fun didn't translate at all. Instead, it emerged as a harsh clicking sound that made one of the junior Vexari diplomats faint. The unconscious alien was quickly dragged away by 2 others. Reynolds stepped in before Kowalski could cause an interstellar incident. "What my officer means is that humans have channeled our competitive instincts into structured activities that prevent actual harm. Yet your officer Kowalski just struck Delegate Zsas for a verbal comment about your hockey." Krex's tongue flicked out, tasting the unfamiliar word. "That was an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding," Reynolds said diplomatically. "Yeah, where I come from. Them's fighting words," Kowalski added, not helping at all. Krex's inner eyelids flickered rapidly. "Fighting words. Words that necessitate physical combat." "It's a figure of speech," Nayak interjected. "But she actually fought," said another Vexari, this one with an elaborate headdress that Reynolds had been told signified their equivalent of a cultural anthropologist. "Yeah, well, sometimes figures of speech become literal," Kowalski said with another shrug. Reynolds considered spacing his security chief without a suit. Instead, he forced a smile. "Perhaps we could move on to the cultural exchange portion of our meeting? We've prepared presentations on Earth's biodiversity, art, and scientific achievements." Krex nodded stiffly, but Reynolds noticed how the Vexari delegation clustered together, keeping maximum distance from the humans as they moved toward the conference chamber. He also couldn't help but notice that 2 of them had activated what appeared to be personal shield generators. "Sir," Nayak whispered as they followed the aliens, "I think they've classified us as unpredictable predators." "Nonsense," Reynolds replied. "We're a peaceful, advanced civilization." At that exact moment, from behind them, came Kowalski's booming voice, "Hey lizard dudes." You ever heard of arm wrestling? I'll show you after the boring slideshows. Reynolds closed his eyes again and counted to 20 this time. First contact was going to be a very long day. The species known as humans represents an unprecedented threat to galactic harmony, Ambassador Krex declared, his clawed hand sweeping dramatically across the chamber. They engage in recreational violence. The Galactic Council chamber erupted in gasps and murmurs. Reynolds glanced around at the semicircular arrangement of alien representatives, 27 species in total, each more bizarre than the last. Some were gaseous beings contained in hovering crystalline chambers. Others resembled what might happen if Earth's marine life evolved opposable thumbs and developed a taste for formal wear. That's a gross mischaracterization, countered Meera Patel, the human defense attorney who'd been hastily assigned to represent Earth's interests. She was a small woman with an iron spine and the kind of voice that made even hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. Humans channel competitive instincts in controlled environments. Councillor Blurb, a gelatinous pink mass who served as head of the council, rippled with what might have been concern. Is it true that humans engage in something called boxing, where the explicit goal is to render your opponent unconscious through repeated cranial trauma? Kowalski, who was sitting beside Reynolds, nodded enthusiastically. It's awesome. I've got videos on my tablet if you want to. That won't be necessary, Reynolds interrupted, elbowing his security chief so hard she actually winced. Patel cleared her throat. If I may, the prosecution is painting humanity as uniquely violent. Yet every predator species in this council has evolutionary histories involving killing. For sustenance, Krex hissed. For territory, for reproduction. Not for entertainment. The Vexari delegation's cultural shock is understandable, came a small voice from the witness stand. Reynolds turned to see a small, grey-skinned alien with enormous eyes and spindly limbs. The nameplate identified him as Dr. Zog, xenoanthropologist. Humans are indeed unusual, Zog continued, adjusting what appeared to be the alien equivalent of glasses. In my 17 cycles studying Earth transmissions, I've documented 157 distinct combat sports, 1,243 war simulation games, and an entire entertainment industry built around fictional violence. See? Krex pointed accusingly. Even their own expert confirms it. Actually, Zog corrected. I'm not testifying for either side. I'm merely providing context. Humans are complex beings who simultaneously create art, medicine, and weapons with equal passion. Let's examine their planetary broadcasts, said a multi-eyed counselor from a species Reynolds hadn't been introduced to. A holographic screen materialized in the center of the chamber. Scenes began playing, boxing matches, action movies, hockey games, paintball competitions. Note how they smile during these activities, Krex said. They enjoy simulated killing. That's not, Patel began. And this, Krex interrupted, as the display showed a first-person shooter video game, a virtual training for killing sentient beings. It's just a game, Reynolds protested. Nobody actually dies. That's somehow worse, whispered a plant-based counselor, their leaf-like appendages trembling. You mimic death for amusement? Kowalski leaned over to Reynolds. Captain, I'm starting to think these folks don't know how to have fun. That's exactly the problem, Reynolds muttered back. Their definition of fun doesn't include anything that might even symbolically represent violence. Patel was doing her best. Counselors, humans have channeled our competitive drives into harmless activities precisely because we don't want actual conflict. It's a substitute, not a preparation. Then explain this, Krex said, as the screen showed children playing with toy weapons. Zog adjusted his spectacles again. A fascinating developmental behavior. Human young practice conflict resolution through play, developing both competitive and cooperative skills simultaneously. They're teaching their larvae to kill for pleasure, a counselor shrieked. They're playing cowboys and aliens, Kowalski said. Lighten up. The chamber erupted again, this time with various council translators struggling to convert lighten up into comprehensible concepts for their respective species. Blurb's gelatinous form pulsated with what appeared to be a call for order. We will take a brief recess to consider the evidence. The question before us: should humans be quarantined as a danger to galactic society? As the councillors began filing out, Patel turned to Reynolds with a grim expression. This isn't going well. They see us as psychopaths because we play laser tag. Great, Reynolds sighed. Humanity's first galactic trial, and we're being prosecuted for enjoying dodgeball. The council was about to reconvene when the station's alarm system activated with a sound like a pipe organ being fed through a wood chipper. What in the 17 hells is that? Kowalski shouted over the noise. A holographic projection of a reptilian technician appeared in the center of the chamber. Councillors, the Devourer fleet has entered the system. The chamber exploded into pandemonium. Councillors of various shapes and consistencies scrambled, floated, or oozed toward exits. Some species Reynolds hadn't been introduced to appeared to be dissolving in terror. Who or what are the Devourers? Reynolds asked Zog, who remained remarkably calm amid the chaos. Your predator species, the small alien replied, adjusting his spectacles. No civilization, no technology of their own. They appropriate ships and weapons from conquered species and consume all organic matter on planets they invade. So they're basically space locusts, Kowalski said. With stolen battleships, Zog added. Reynolds turned to Patel. We need to offer assistance. Where's the Council Defense Force? Blurb, the gelatinous head councillor, overheard the question as he oozed past. The Council relies on automated defenses, no standing military. No military? Kowalski looked like she'd just been told Christmas was cancelled. Who fights for you? Fighting is primitive, Krex said, joining their circle with obvious reluctance. Civilized species develop technology to eliminate the need for violence. The station shuddered. Emergency lights pulsed a sickly yellow. Automated perimeter defenses have failed, announced the holographic technician. Devourer boarding parties detected in sectors 7 through 12. Reynolds straightened his uniform. Ambassador Krex, our ship has a complement of trained security personnel. Let us help defend the station. Absolutely not, Krex replied. The last thing we need is humans using this crisis as an excuse to indulge their violent tendencies. Another impact rocked the station. This time, the lights flickered and dimmed. Secondary power engaged, said a computerized voice. Estimated time to life support failure, 47 minutes. With all due respect, Ambassador, Reynolds said, your civilization's aversion to violence is about to get everyone on this station killed or eaten. Zog stepped forward. Captain Reynolds is correct. The Devourers are pure apex predators. They don't negotiate, communicate, or show mercy. They consume. Our evacuation vessels will Krex began. They have already been destroyed, interrupted the holographic technician before fizzling out of existence. Kowalski cracked her knuckles. So, we're fighting space locusts whether the lizard people like it or not. We are not lizard people, Krex hissed. We need clearance to access weapons, Reynolds insisted. Our diplomatic vessel has limited armaments. Out of the question. Krex's scales flushed a deep crimson. The Council forbids. The station's main doors exploded inward, sending shrapnel across the chamber. Through the smoke emerged what Reynolds could only describe as the unholy offspring of a praying mantis and a crocodile. It stood nearly 10 feet tall on 4 backward-jointed legs, with 2 additional limbs ending in what appeared to be stolen energy weapons. Is that a devourer? Reynolds asked, oddly calm. Indeed, Zog replied, equally composed. Fascinating specimens. They've incorporated cybernetic enhancements from at least 3 different conquered species. Fascinating isn't the word I'd use, Patel muttered, ducking behind a council seat. The Devourer let out a screech that made Reynolds' fillings hurt and fired its weapon. A councillor who resembled a sentient chandelier disintegrated into glittering dust. The authorization to defend the station. Ambassador? Reynolds asked Krex again. The Vexari diplomat was frozen in place, scales now a pale blue of absolute terror. I'll take that as a yes, Reynolds said. He tapped his communication badge. Reynolds to Earth Vessel Diplomatic Corps. Protocol Omega. I repeat, Protocol Omega. What's Protocol Omega? Patel asked, still crouched behind the seat. Kowalski grinned. It means the diplomats are done talking, and now we get to do things our way. Technically, Reynolds corrected, it means extreme danger, authorized use of all available resources to preserve life. Like I said, Kowalski replied, pulling a compact sidearm from her boot that definitely wasn't on the approved list of diplomatic mission equipment. We get to do things our way. As three more devourers burst through the ruined doorway, Reynolds couldn't help but think that humanity was about to give the Galactic Council a very practical demonstration of why sometimes violence wasn't just necessary, it was the point. So let me get this straight. Lieutenant Commander Dax Martinez said as he rummaged through the station's maintenance closet. We're fighting space bugs with mantis heads and crocodile teeth. The aliens who think we're too violent won't let us use actual weapons. And we have approximately 30 minutes before life support fails. That about sums it up, Reynolds confirmed, watching as his chief engineer examined what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a pipe wrench. Cool. Just another Tuesday. Martinez tossed the wrench aside and continued digging through the equipment. A lanky man with perpetually oil-stained hands and a mind that worked at twice the speed of everyone else's. Martinez had never met a mechanical problem he couldn't solve, usually in the most unorthodox way possible. What exactly are you looking for? Patel asked, nervously glancing at the barricaded door. Something combustible, some tubing, and ideally a pressure valve, Martinez replied. I'm going to make a flamethrower. From maintenance equipment? You'd be surprised what you can weaponize when you understand basic thermodynamics. Meanwhile, Kowalski had organized the remaining security team from the diplomatic corps into a defensive perimeter. Despite strict regulations limiting weapons on diplomatic missions, Reynolds was unsurprised to discover his security team had smuggled in an impressive arsenal of personal protection items. Captain, Kowalski called over, we've got 6 functional energy pistols, 3 tactical knives, and Ensign Okafor's collection of throwing stars. Throwing stars? Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Hobby, sir. Okafor explained with a shrug. Never know when they'll come in handy. Dr. Zog observed all of this with evident fascination. Remarkable, he muttered, scribbling notes on a tablet. Faced with apex predators, humans don't retreat or freeze, they improvise weapons and organize for counterattack. Is that unusual? Reynolds asked. Most species either flee or surrender to inevitable death, Zog explained. The concept of fighting when outmatched is uniquely human. The Krex, who had been huddled with the remaining Vexari delegation, approached cautiously. Your security chief has distributed weapons to civilians, he noted, indicating where Patel was now awkwardly holding an energy pistol. Everyone fights. No one quits, Kowalski said. You want to live forever? That quote is from fictional propaganda, Patel muttered. Still motivational. A thunderous bang on the barricaded door silenced the banter. Metal groaned as something massive pressed against it from the other side. Martinez, Reynolds called. Status on that flamethrower? Almost there, the engineer replied, but I think I can do better. He had disassembled the station's beverage dispenser, what Reynolds had been calling the coffee machine. Though it produced nothing resembling Earth coffee and was connecting it to several pressurized tanks. What are you making? Zog asked, peering over Martinez's shoulder. I'm turning the coolant system for their beverage dispenser into a freeze ray, Martinez explained. This liquid nitrogen under pressure should flash freeze those buggers solid. That's not how our technology works, Krex said. Martinez grinned. It is now. The barricade shuddered again. Metal twisted as massive claws began to tear through the reinforced door. Everyone in position. Reynolds ordered. Martinez, we need that weapon now. Just one more connection, and the engineer twisted 2 tubes together. The makeshift device hummed ominously. Got it. Martinez hefted what looked like a jury-rigged fire extinguisher connected to the guts of the beverage machine, with control panels dangling by wires. I call it the Frost Blaster 3000. That's a terrible name, Kowalski said. You try coming up with something better while building a cryogenic weapon from coffee machine parts. The door burst open. 3 devourers scuttled into the room, their mandibles clicking in what Reynolds could only interpret as hungry anticipation. Martinez. Now, Reynolds shouted. The engineer pulled what had once been the beverage dispenser's trigger. A blast of supercooled vapor shot forth, engulfing the lead devourer. The creature screeched, its exoskeleton crystallizing instantly. It toppled over, frozen solid. Holy shit! Kowalski breathed. It worked. Was there ever any doubt? Martinez grinned, then frowned as his weapon began to emit an alarming whine. Correction. It worked once. The device exploded in a shower of sparks and frozen components. Martinez dove for cover as the remaining devourers advanced. Everyone fall back to position B. Reynolds ordered. Kowalski, covering fire. As energy blasts lit up the chamber, Krex stared at the humans in bewilderment. You're enjoying this, he accused. Reynolds paused mid-retreat. Enjoying? No. But we're not going to roll over and die either. To be fair, Kowalski added as she fired at a devourer's leg joint, this is kind of awesome. Reynolds caught Zog still taking notes amid the chaos. Are you documenting our last stand? He asked the xenoanthropologist. Not at all, Zog replied calmly. I'm documenting the first recorded instance of a species fighting apex predators not because they have to, but because they want to prove they can. They're not attacking like predators, Reynolds observed, watching the devourer's movements from behind an overturned council platform. They're using tactics. It contradicts all existing research, Zog said, somehow still taking notes despite the chaos. Devourers are supposed to be pure instinct, hunt, kill, consume. The creatures had split into groups, attempting to flank the human defensive position. One particularly large specimen appeared to be directing the others with clicking mandible signals. They're learning, Kowalski said grimly, adapting to our resistance. And Martinez, who had spent the last 10 minutes disassembling a lighting fixture, looked up. Simple pattern recognition. They still think like predators, and predators expect prey to behave logically. So? Patel asked, clutching her borrowed weapon. A slow grin spread across Martinez's face. So we don't behave logically. Reynolds caught his engineer's drift immediately. Kowalski, how much of that explosive gel do you have left? 3 packets. The security chief replied, barely enough for a decent distraction. Perfect. Reynolds looked at his improvised fighting force. Here's the plan, and it's deliberately stupid. We're going to charge them. What? Krex, who had reluctantly joined their defensive position, turned a pale shade of yellow. That's suicide. Exactly, Reynolds nodded. No prey species would ever run toward apex predators. It makes no evolutionary sense. Which is precisely why it'll work, Martinez added. They'll hesitate, trying to process the contradiction. That hesitation will last approximately 1.7 seconds, Zog calculated. Is that enough time? Watch and learn, Professor, Kowalski said, pulling the explosive gel packets from her vest. Martinez, I need your remaining coolant tubes. While they prepared their makeshift bombs, Reynolds turned to the few alien counselors who'd stayed with them, instead of fleeing deeper into the station. We need a diversion. Something big and loud to draw their attention when we signal. A counselor with 4 arms and skin like burnished copper stepped forward. The grand pronouncement chimes, he suggested, used for ceremonial council declarations. There. Quite loud. Perfect. Trigger them on my signal. Reynolds turned back to his team. Everyone clear on the plan? Run screaming at the murder bugs. Throw cool bombs. Don't die, Kowalski summarized. Crystal clear, sir. More specifically, Martinez corrected, the coolant will create a rapid temperature drop when it mixes with the explosive gel, causing a thermodynamic reaction that should make a big boom. Kowalski interrupted. Got it. Reynolds nodded to Krex. ready to see how humans fight when they've got a point to prove. The Vexari diplomat's scales rippled with what might have been resignation. "You're all insane." "That's our tactical advantage," Reynolds agreed. He tapped his communicator. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, now." The grand pronouncement chimes activated with a sound like 1,000 cathedral bells being struck simultaneously. The Devourers paused, sensory organs swiveling toward the deafening noise. "Charge," Reynolds shouted, and the humans burst from cover, running directly at the startled predators. As predicted, the Devourers froze momentarily, their primitive brains unable to process prey that ran toward danger instead of away from it. That split second of confusion was all the humans needed. Kowalski hurled the improvised cryo-bombs. They detonated with a whoomp of displaced air, encasing 3 Devourers in rapidly expanding frost, while simultaneously creating a concussive blast that shattered their frozen exoskeletons. The remaining creatures recovered and scrambled to attack, but the humans had already broken through their line, creating chaos in what had been an organized hunting formation. "They can't coordinate when we're among them," Reynolds shouted, ducking under slashing claws and firing his weapon at point-blank range into a Devourer's sensory cluster. What followed was pure, beautiful chaos. Humans darted between the massive predators, using their superior agility and unpredictability to confuse creatures that relied on predictable prey behavior. Martinez slid between a Devourer's legs, attaching his last power cell to its underside before rolling away. The resulting electrical discharge sent the creature into spasms. Ensign Okafor's throwing stars found vulnerable joints between exoskeletal plates. Patel, despite her lack of combat training, displayed a lawyer's precision by targeting the same weak points repeatedly. Most surprisingly, Krex joined the fray. The Vexari diplomat moved with unexpected grace, using his knowledge of xenobiology to indicate vulnerable points to the human fighters. "There," he called to Reynolds, pointing at a neural cluster on the lead Devourer's neck that controls motor function. Reynolds didn't hesitate, adjusting his aim and firing. The creature collapsed in a heap of twitching limbs. The remaining Devourers began to retreat, their swarm logic apparently concluding that this prey was too costly to hunt. As they scuttled back toward the breached doorway, Kowalski couldn't resist a parting shot that took down one more. "And stay out," she shouted after them. In the sudden quiet, Reynolds surveyed the scene. Humans were panting, injured but alive. The council chamber was in ruins, and Zog was still taking notes. Unprecedented, the xenoanthropologist was muttering, fighting not for food, not for territory, but because failure was personally offensive to them. "No," Reynolds corrected, helping Patel to her feet. "We fought because sometimes you need to prove that being civilized doesn't mean being helpless." Krex, scales now a thoughtful shade of blue-green, regarded Reynolds with new eyes. "Perhaps there is something to be said for recreational combat training after all." 3 days after what was already being called the chamber incident in hushed tones by council species, Captain Reynolds stood once again before the Galactic Council. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. For one thing, half the chamber was still under reconstruction. For another, the council members weren't looking at the humans with horror, but with a complex mixture of fear, respect, and reluctant curiosity. "The council recognizes Captain Jack Reynolds of Earth," announced Councillor Blurb, whose gelatinous form had developed an interesting new greenish tinge since the attack. "Thank you, Councillor," Reynolds said. He was still sporting a bandage above his left eye, and walked with a slight limp. "I'm here to conclude our disrupted hearing regarding humanity's status in the galactic community." "Yes, well," Blurb wobbled in what might have been embarrassment. "Circumstances have changed." "Indeed," agreed Krex, whose formal diplomatic robes now featured what looked suspiciously like tactical reinforcements. "The Devourer incursion has provided new context for evaluating human behavioral patterns." In other words, Kowalski muttered from beside Reynolds, "They're not so high and mighty about violence now that we saved their scaly butts." Reynolds silenced her with a look, though privately he agreed. Zog stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Councillors, If I may present my preliminary findings, our observational data from the incident provides fascinating insights into human combat psychology. The council murmured assent, and a holographic display activated in the center of the chamber. As you can see, Zog continued, displaying footage from the station's security systems, humans exhibit several unique characteristics when fighting. First, they employ deliberately irrational tactics to confuse predator expectations. The display showed Reynolds leading the charge directly at the Devourers. Second, they improvise weapons from available materials, demonstrating problem-solving under extreme pressure. Martinez's makeshift cryo-bombs exploded in slow motion on the screen. Third, and most remarkably, they display emotional responses during combat that appear counterproductive but actually enhance performance like this. The display showed Kowalski shouting insults at the retreating Devourers. In summary, Zog concluded, humans don't just fight when hungry or threatened. They fight when insulted, when challenged or simply to prove they can. And paradoxically, this makes them more effective fighters than pure predator species. A thoughtful silence fell over the chamber. So, Reynolds said, has the Council reached a decision about humanity's status? Blurb rippled. We have. After extensive deliberation, humans are classified as chaotic neutral allies. That's not a real classification, Patel whispered. It is now, Reynolds whispered back. I'll take it. Krex approached the human delegation. Captain Reynolds, the Vexari Confederation would like to propose a cultural exchange program. Specifically, we request training in your recreational combat techniques. Reynolds blinked. You want us to teach you how to play hockey? Among other skills, Krex said, his scales flushing a slight pink. The Devourer attack has exposed weaknesses in our civilization's approach to self-defense. While we maintain that violence without necessity is philosophically problematic, we acknowledge that preparation for defensive action has practical benefits. Well, I'll be damned. Kowalski grinned. The space lizards want to learn how to throw a punch. Not exactly, Krex corrected. We wish to understand how humans transform biological aggression into controlled skill. Reynolds extended his hand. Ambassador, we would be honored to demonstrate that humanity's greatest strength isn't our capacity for violence, but our ability to channel it constructively. As they shook hands, Krex had clearly been practicing the human gesture. Martinez leaned toward Patel. Does this mean I'm allowed to build weapons now? Because I've got some ideas for upgrading their defense grid. One step at a time, Patel cautioned. Let's teach them dodgeball before we hand over plasma cannons. Later, as the human delegation prepared to return to their ship, Zog approached Reynolds with a final question. Captain, there's one aspect of human combat psychology I still don't understand. When facing the Devourer's creatures that hunt only from biological necessity, you fought not just to survive, but to prove a point. What exactly was that point? Reynolds smiled. That the most dangerous species in the universe isn't the one that kills because it's hungry. He glanced at Kowalski, who was already demonstrating a fighting stance to a group of fascinated Vexari diplomats. It's the one that fights because it has something to protect, including its own stubborn pride. Zog made a final note. Fascinating. Apex predators kill only when hungry. But humans, Reynolds finished, kill when it matters.